Hey, what is up YouTube? Kolst here. So all the cards for the new expansion Alterac Valley have been revealed, and so I'm just going to make this video to go through all the ones that I haven't already reviewed as part of one of the previous reviews. So I'm going to do things a little bit differently this time, just in the interest of trying to save time. So I'm going to basically spend less time talking about like what I think about the cards and more just I'll give it like a 1 through 5 star rating system basically, and just try to, knock them down as quickly as possible. And a couple of things to get out of the way before we get started. So if there's a card again that I don't talk about, it means I talked about it previously. I did them in order of when they were revealed, so you can hopefully find them in the videos that way if you want to find a particular card. But also I want to just talk quickly about the new keywords. Honorable kill means if you're able to deal exact lethal damage to an enemy, then you get whatever effect is on the card. And it's important to know that you can get it multiple times, so that's a critical thing for those. And then the new card type is objectives, which are these kind of cards that last for 3 turns and do an effect at the end of each turn. And of course, if you like the video, like it. If you dislike it, dislike. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of arena style content. I should probably mention that this is an arena focused review, so if this doesn't align with, what a constructed player would think of these cards, that would probably be the reason why. So without further ado, let's get right into it. I guess the one other thing I should mention, which will impact some of these cards, is we don't actually know what the rotation is going to be. Arena, if you're not aware, has a wild rotation where they bring in random sets typically as of late, so, it's impossible for some of these synergy-based cards to know exactly how well they're going to do. And that is relevant for the first one here, which is Fellwalker. This is a 6 mana 3/7 demon with taunt. Battlecry, cast the highest cost Fell spell from your hand. This I'm gonna give like a 2 out of 5 too. It's not enough stats. Like a 6 mana 3/7 isn't that bad, but it's not particularly good. And the problem with Fell spells, I was looking them over, and like it depends on again what's in rotation exactly, but they tend to be pretty situational. Like obviously Demonic Assault, this thing might shoot itself, right? Like it's not necessarily going to be good. You might not want to cast your Imp Swarm immediately. You'd probably be pretty happy with that one, but like you might not want to cast even like a Shadow Council. Just a lot of the Fell spells are really situational, so, and you're also just not that likely to even have a Fell spell in the first place, so I feel like this just isn't going to be consistent enough, but I could be wrong. There are no super high cost Fell spells. The highest one would be this new one, which is Fire in the Hole, which I guess we might as well talk about right now. This one is 5 mana, draw a spell and deal 2 damage to all enemies. If it's a spell, deal 1 more. So this would be like the best thing you could get off of it, because you get a card draw and you get to deal either 2 or 3 AoE damage. It would just be, it's the same thing. It's obviously never going to be bad to cast this, but you might not do it exactly when you want to, right? If you cast it off of Fellwalker. But this, thing to note with this as well, is as an epic, so it won't appear super often. So obviously Warlock doesn't exactly need card draw, but it's still nice. Like drawing a spell is still good. A lot of times your best cards are going to be your spells. But the thing with this is that, you're not always going to have Fell spells, and even if you have Fell spells, you're not guaranteed to draw the Fell spell, right? So I think this is just a little bit expensive for what it does, especially if it only does 2 damage AoE. Like that's really only like, you'd probably only pay like 3 mana, so then you're paying 2 mana to draw a card. It's just, and you just don't need that in Warlock. So this is definitely not a terrible card. I'll probably give this like a 3 out of 5. The only reason I give it 3 is because, sometimes you just want any AoE you can get in Warlock, basically. So I think it'll be okay just for that. Like, this is probably say it's a little bit better than Hellfire, right? Hellfire is basically the worst AoE. It's probably a little bit better. So I'll give it an okay rating, but it's not super premium. Now let's move on to the next card, which is Desecrated Graveyard. This is a 3 mana objective card. At the end of your turn, destroy your lowest attack minion to summon a 4/4 Shade. Lasts for 3 turns. So this is an interesting one because it could be very, very good. The issue being most likely that this can actually completely block you too. Like once you play this, you're committed, right? You can't cancel this. And this is out of all the objective type cards, I think this is the one that might actually backfire. Because I mean, obviously it means if you play anything bigger than a 4/4 and you don't have something smaller, then you're just gonna lose it, right? And so that's the thing, is like if you eat a 1/1 and turn it into a 4/4, it's kind of done enough for a 3 mana card, but there's this risk of that downside, right? And making it just be completely unplayable because it might not let you play your 5 or 6 drop or something, you know? So it's gonna be one of those cards where if if you're kind of drafting Zoo really low curve, it's gonna be amazing overall, but if you're not, then it's going to possibly backfire and just not be playable. So I think overall, I'll give it like a 3 out of 5, because I think the average Warlock just isn't going to take advantage of it super well and consistently. But if you do draft around this card, this could be one of those really strong synergy cards. Just basically if you have a bunch of 1-drops or any of these kind of imp summoning type cards. But I just think in the average deck it's going to be a little bit too awkward. Next we'll move on to Full-Blown Evil. This is a 3 mana Fel spell. Deal 5 damage randomly split among all enemy minions. Repeatable this turn. This would be one of the things you could pull out again with Fel Walker, but the problem is that you're losing the repeatable then, because it would just not work, because you would have already spent all your mana on the Fel Walker. So this is just a very efficient removal, I think. There was Mage had a spell which was 3 mana deal 5, but it was all enemies, so it could go face, which in Construct is a good thing, but in Arena is typically a bad thing. I think this kind of removal is just really strong. Again, it's only enemies, it's not like two-sided or anything. And I think it's efficient enough that it's just really good because it's random. It can hit, you can remove things that are stealthed and things like that. Something like a Burrowing Scorpid, for example. And Warlock sometimes will often struggle with these kind of boards, so that would make this thing really good. So I think overall this is a very good card. I think I'll give it a 4 out of 5. I think it's just not quite dominating enough to be a 5, but this is a very strong 4, I think. Next we'll move on to Grave Defiler. This is a 1 mana 2/1 with Battlecry. Copy a Fel spell in your hand. So in Warlock, if you do get a 1 mana 2/1, it's typically not the worst thing ever. So it's already going to be somewhat playable. If you copy a Fel spell, it'd be interesting to know if it actually shows your opponent what the Fel spell is. It probably doesn't, but they will know that you have a Fel spell, obviously, depending on what you can get. Some of these Fel spells have been really good, as we've already talked about earlier. You'd love to have 2 Demonic Assaults, right? So I think this is good. I don't think I can really give this more than a 3 out of 5. Maybe in another class, this would be really good. I'm being very conservative with these ratings because there are going to be certain cards that are so much better, by the way, that are going to get the 5s and stuff. But this is definitely solid. But yeah, I'll say this is just decent. 3 out of 5. With that, let's move on to the last Warlock card here, which is Seeds of Destruction. 2 mana, shuffle 4 Rifts into your deck. They summon a 3/3 Dread Imp when drawn. So these types of cards are never usually super good in Arena. They tend to be conservatively statted and costed to the point that they're not crazy strong, and I don't think this is any exception. If you do draw a Dread Imp immediately, it's pretty good, but that's kind of how they always tend to be. The problem is that you don't have all of this, cycle and card draw and deck burning potential that you might have in Constructed, so you can't really control this. So as a strong player, typically a type of RNG you want to avoid. So this thing is probably not unpickable, but it's just not going to be exactly what you're looking for. I'll give it a 2 out of 5. Alright, so that's all the Warlock cards. We'll move on next to Mage. So Mage, I believe we left off at the Iceblood Tower, which casts a whole bunch of hopefully big spells from your deck, and then they started revealing all of these big spell stuff. So the first one here, which I did talk about, but I didn't formally rate last time, is Mass Polymorph. 7 mana, transform all minions into 1/1 sheep. So it is two-sided, it transforms your minions as well. Important to note, but generally speaking, I mean, Mage has had this problem in Arena lately because they lost Polymorph, and we haven't even had Devolving Missiles or anything, that they can't transform anything. If you get a big Death Rattle, they're kind of screwed, right? So this is finally an answer to that. You probably don't want to... Ideally, wouldn't use this on just one thing, but, just being able to kill one big thing might be what you need. So definitely, you wouldn't want to draft this super highly in every deck, just because, I mean, a fast deck probably doesn't have too much use for this, but it's still not going to be the worst thing to have. So overall, any mass removal like this is going to be pretty good. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. Okay, in the interest of time, I'll skip the hero card because it won't be draftable in Arena, presumably. And with that, we move on to Rune of the Archmage. 9 mana, epic spell. cast 20 mana worth of mage spells at enemies. So the fact that it is at enemies is very important because, you know, obviously this is like basically the new puzzle box, but puzzle box could, you know, do exactly what you don't want to do. And it was also all spells, but this one is only mage spells. So as long as Conjurer's Calling isn't in rotation, you're pretty happy, right? If Conjurer's Calling is in rotation, that's a little scary. Yeah, generally speaking, mage spells tend to do a lot. The thing is, it's like, just by raw power level, Puzzle Box was like one of the best cards in Mage ever. It's the thing that I'm not sure about this one is exactly how it compares to Puzzle Box. Because it casts at enemies, I think it's gotta be pretty good. You know, you can get, it's probably gonna blow up any board, you'd have to imagine. And you're probably gonna get a decent amount of value or secrets or whatever as well. So I think it's very, very good. Honestly, you'd have to do like a whole bunch of math or just see it play out a while to see whether this is a 4 or a 5, I think. I'm going to conservatively give it a 4 out of 5, but full disclosure, it might just be a 5 out of 5. We'll just have to see it play out. Well, now let's move on to the next mage card, which is Amplified Snow Flurry. So there are a lot of really strong 2-drops in this expansion, really interesting ones for Arena in general, but this one is 2 mana, 2/3 Battle Cry, your next hero power cost 0, and freezes the target. So what's really funny about this one is that Water Boy was a card which is like so much weaker than this. But yeah, essentially, I mean, this does more than any 2-drop would ever do before, like, you know, very recently. So it's just very, very strong. I think the fact that it's just a 2-drop kind of still prevents it from being like a 5 out of 5. So I'll give it a 4 out of 5. But this is, make no mistake, this is like one of the best 2-drops ever made. But it's just very, very strong. With that, let's move on to the next card here, which is Shivering Sorcerers. I can't believe Mage is actually getting a 1 mana 2/2. That's pretty crazy. But yeah, Battle Cry, reduce the cost of your highest cost spell in your hand by 1. So assuming, I mean, if you just have a 1 mana 2/2, it's already pretty good, right? And being able to, especially if you have some of these really big spells, being able to cast, I don't know, your Rune of the Archmage a turn early or your Flame Strike a turn early. Any of these types of things could be really, really good potentially, right? Yeah, again, I think it's very good. I'll give it a 4 out of 5, basically for the same reasoning as the other one. It does way more than an early game card should, but at the end of the day, it's just an early game card, so I will limit it to 4 out of 5 there. And the last card we have here for Mage is Arcane Brilliance. This is a 4 mana spell. Add a copy of a 7, 8, 9, and 10 cost spell in your deck to your hand. It is very important that it adds a copy, which means you can still draw the originals. And that's very good because if you have any of these big spells in your deck, they're probably going to be some of the best cards you have. So being able to still draw them and get a second one is very, very good. The issue with this card is that, you know, this isn't constructed, so you just aren't that likely to actually have these types of spells. Like, you might get a 7-mana spell, but like out of the new ones, like this is an epic, and this is like the only 9-mana spell you can get. So the drawback of this is that you might just not have enough. Like, probably on average, you'd be lucky to get 2, and 4 mana to draw 2 effectively still isn't really that amazing, right? It's just very slow, especially in recent metas. So I just think in Arena, this probably isn't going to work out well enough. I'll give it a 2 out of 5. There is the potential that if you do have the right things, you know, definitely take this, but just most decks aren't going to be able to take full advantage of it. And with that, let's move on to the next class, which is Warrior. Warrior, last one we talked about is Rukara, so the first one we have here is Scrapsmith. This is a 3 mana 2/4 taunt with Battle Cry. Add 2 2/4 grunts with taunt to your hand. This is basically a reprint of the 3 mana 2/4 Echo guy, except it adds the cards to your hand so they don't go away, so you don't have to like wait until turn 9 to play it like you did with the other one. So I think this is a solid card. Warrior tends to like having taunt in Arena. 3 mana 2/4 is a little weak now, but it's not terrible, and just the value and just having more taunt is pretty good. I'm gonna give this a 3 out of 5, which feels like maybe it's a little high, but I think it's good. It's Warrior likes taunt enough, and you have taunt synergies and hand buff synergies, and any hand buff on this makes it much better as well. So I think it's pretty good. I'll keep it a 3 out of 5. Next we have a Warrior spell, which is To the Front. Your minions cost 2 less this turn, but not less than 1. Some potential synergy with the Scrapsmith there. This is a very interesting card. It's basically a spell version of a Summoning Portal, but only lasts for 1 turn. what you want to have with this would be the same thing as Summoning Pool. You want to have like a bunch of 3 and 4 mana minions in your hand. But overall, I have to say, like, you're probably gonna be a little limited in your ability to really build around this. Essentially, you know, you're gonna be using this as some kind of like mid to late game swing in a sense, but then you're vulnerable to AoE. I don't know. It's hard to justify a card that by itself really doesn't do anything, and that's kind of what this is here. The issue again being that if you haven't like drawn a bunch of cards or something, you're probably just not gonna have enough things to actually really take advantage of this. So this thing has potential, but I'll give it a 2 out of 5 because I think it's just gonna be a little too tricky to pull off in the average deck. But honestly, this is going to be one of those things where just occasionally you're just going to randomly generate or discover this and then just win games off of it. But very rarely, I think. Okay, with that, let's move on to the next card, which is Shield Shatter. 10 mana spell, deal 5 damage to all minions, so it's 2-sided. Costs 1 less for each armor you have. So there are some other armor synergy cards in this set. The issue still being is that armor cards generally just aren't cards you want to draft in Arena that much. And if you don't have armor, this card is terrible. You probably want this card to cost like no more than 5 for it to be like a card you would actually draft. And as I said, you just don't tend to have that much armor in this game mode. So there is some potential. I'll give it a 2 out of 5. But yeah, it's probably not a card you're going to be wanting too much. Now let's move on to Iceblood Garrison. This is a 2 mana objective type card. At the end of your turn, deal 1 damage to all minions, last 3 turns. So I think this is probably actually pretty good, if for no other reason, like if you're going first, your opponent coins a 3/2, for example, or you know, if you're going second and they play a 3/2, you can just play this and it'll just whirlwind the 3/2 twice, and then anything more than that is upside, right? But I will say, like, you know, you might not necessarily, you might need a whirlwind. The fact that it's at end of turn is a little awkward, you know, it makes it not as good against like Divine Shields and stuff like that. But overall, this is just a card where if you are drafting a slow warrior, I think you'll be pretty okay having this. If you're drafting a more tempo aggressive type of deck, this is probably not going to be what you're looking for. I think this is either a strong 2 or a weak 3. I'll give it a weak 3. Again, it's going to depend entirely on what type of deck you're trying to draft. With that, let's move on to the next card, which is Glory Chaser. 3 mana 4/3. After you play a taunt minion, draw a card. And you could have a crazy pop-off turn with To the Front and Glory Chaser and Scrapsmith. That would actually be pretty nuts. That is 8 mana for a 4/3, 3/2/4 taunts, and draw 3. No, actually, it's only 6 mana. That is pretty nuts. So overall, this is a pretty terrifying card. You can imagine if you just throw this out on turn 3, like your opponent needs to kill this thing. If you have taunt to follow it up, they get kind of obliterated, right? Drawing cards isn't quite what it used to be, but Warriors, when those classes I really tend to like denying card draw from, because they tend to have better cards because they don't have a hero power, so they just get better cards. That's kind of how the balance of Arena works. So it's going to depend partially on how many taunts you have. It's going to depend honestly a lot on the rotation, which we don't know yet. Just how many taunt minions, including neutral taunts, just happen to be in the game. Are there good 4-mana taunts to protect this with? We'll have to see. But overall, this probably would have been a 5 a couple of years ago, but nowadays drawing cards just doesn't exactly win games by itself anymore, so I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5. It's a very strong card. You're going to be seeing it a lot. It's a common, so. Now let's move on to the last card in Warrior here, which is Axe Berserker. 4 mana 3/5 with Rush, Honorable Kill, draw a weapon. So obviously if you have Warrior in Arena, you don't always get weapons, but hopefully you have weapons, right? So you should be able to draw off of this if you can trigger that Honorable Kill. Overall, a 4 mana 3/5 Rush just seems pretty decent. Thing that'll be interesting to see will just be how consistently you can actually pull this off, right? If you have like if your opponent plays a 3 mana 3/4, and unless you happen to have a 1/1 or something, like you might just not be able to trigger this on curve. But it does enough that even if you don't draw off of it immediately, it's still good. By the way, you know, important to note, the Honorable Kill sticks around, so if you just kill something off with this or just leave it out there, it still has the potential to draw, and you can potentially draw multiple cards. Anything with Honorable Kill basically has this, you know, must be removed text effectively on it, so I don't think that's enough to give this a 5, so I'm gonna give this a 4 out of 5. Alright, so that is it with Warrior. Next we have Priest. First one we haven't talked about is Deliverance. This is 3 mana, deal 3 to a minion. Honorable Kill, summon a new 3/3 copy of it. So this one, there are multiple things that punish 3 health minions in this set. This thing, I mean, 3 mana deal 3, it's not terrible, I guess, but, you know, we move past that. It's not really good enough unless you're casting this Arbor Kill. The thing is that you're getting essentially a little mini mind control as a sense out of this. The game is just going to be, you know, the whole thing with this card is how consistently can you actually trigger that Honorable Kill. Because if you do get the Honorable Kill, if it has Death Rattle or something, you get to have that as well. You can imagine it'd be pretty good just in the early game, just for the chance, you know, if your opponent plays a 2-3 or a 4-3, like you can just play this on it, right? And then you're basically getting something that's close to a Serpent Shrine portal without the overload. And so I think that's probably the way you're most commonly going to see this used. So of course, a card that even if it's not 100% consistent in that sense, the fact that it can be a very good tempo card, and then you also have these kind of fringe late game situations where you get an additional effect as well. Any early game tempo card that also has late game utility, generally going to be very good. So I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5. It's worth noting that this will be a little bit weaker probably if, you know, Og Merchants rotate out, for example, and then you might not have quite the flexibility to trigger the Honorable Kill, because you kind of do need to trigger the Honorable Kill to get the value, but I'm assuming it won't be too difficult. People tend to have 3 health minions. With that, let's move on to the next one, which is Spirit Guide. Spirit Guide is a 5 mana, 5/5 taunt with Death Rattle. Draw a Holy Spell and a Shadow Spell. So 5 mana, 5/5 taunt, but also draw 2. The one thing is that you're not guaranteed to have both a Holy Spell and a Shadow Spell, but even if you just draw 1, I would say this is like easily good enough. And both Holy Spells and Shadow Spells that you tend to draft do tend to be very, very good. You know, the only drawback is that the fact that it's a Death Rattle, it can be silenced, and has been silenced in Arena lately. So it can be denied. But generally speaking, I mean, just a taunt that draws is going to be very, very good. Somebody call Ancient of Lore, he's crying. So I think honestly, even though this is a little strong, I'm going to give this a 5 out of 5 just because it does too much essentially, and it does exactly what Priest wants to do. Priest has had kind of a value problem lately. A lot of Priests, you just beat them on value. And this card basically just makes it impossible to lose on value, assuming you actually, you know, do get the draws. So I'm going to give this a 5. I think it's a weak 5, but I'm still going to give it a 5. Moving on to the next one, we have Stormpike Aid Station. 3 mana, at the end of your turn, give your minions +2 health, lasts 3 turns. So I've noticed people memeing on this card and Constructed, being like, what is this crap? As far as Arena is concerned, I mean, the fact that you can stack it on the one minion, right? If you're able to get ahead and then you play this, it is gonna do a lot, right? It's gonna snowball essentially. The thing is that's essentially what it will be. You're not gonna combo super hard with this in Arena. Because it's just like, you know, imagine like when are you actually going to play this? If you play this on 3, you're not really getting any value out of it, most likely, right? You can't value trade, unfortunately, with a 2-drop that you might have if you played on with a 3/2, because you can't kill your opponent's 2/3 because you haven't gotten the health buff yet. So you have to wait. So you want to play this in the mid game, but then like what? You're just going to play this in a 3-drop on turn 6 or something? That still seems kind of weak. So you have to already be winning for this card to be good, so probably just going to be a little, not exactly what you're going to want to draft, because cards like that just don't tend to be very good. It's not garbage though, so I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5, because it really is just essentially a win harder card. Moving on to the next one, we have Luminous Geode. This is a 2 mana, 1/4 elemental in Priest. After a friendly minion is healed, give it +2 attack. So it has to be healed, it cannot be a health buff. Otherwise, it should be pretty good with the other thing, right? So a 2 mana 1/4 is okay. It could be annoying, it could stick, which means you could actually get some value out of this. This is kind of weird though, because essentially you're not generally wanting to heal minions that much in Arena as Priest nowadays. At least not with your hero power. There is one card, which we will talk about in a little bit, which makes this potentially significantly better, but this is an epic. So overall, you're probably just gonna not expect too much out of this, I think. You would probably want to play this. I don't know, it's like, is this really what you're going to be trying to win the game with in a late game? Probably not. But I guess like playing a 1/4 on 2 isn't that bad, and it has late game utility as well. Early game cards with late game utility usually can't be too bad. So I'm going to give this a 3 out of 5. I think it's fine, and there is some potential. I mean, even if you just have this with like a Holy Nova, right? The minions actually have to be damaged, I think, so might still not quite exactly work, but it definitely has some potential. Now let's move on to the next card, which is, as we mentioned previously, Gift of the Naru. This is a 1 mana holy spell. Restore 3 health to all characters. If any are still damaged, draw a card. So this does heal the enemy hero, which does matter, but typically, I mean, this does a lot. You obviously, play this when you want to heal your minions ideally, but even if you, just need to heal and cycle, you can do that as well. So you probably wouldn't necessarily want to pick this 100% in aggro, but I mean, it might still be worth healing the enemy to draw a card, honestly. So especially in a slower or more mid-rangey type of deck, this just seems very good. I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5 because you're pretty much always, maybe not immediately, not on turn 1, but you're always going to be able to hopefully get some positive minion healing value out of this and also draw simultaneously. So seems like it just does a lot. Maybe 4 is a little high because it does require you to be on board, but it's not like such win harder like some of the other cards. So I'm gonna stick with 4 out of 5. With this, we move on to the last priest card here, which is Bless. 2 mana holy spell, give a minion +2 health, then set its attack to be equal to its health. So basically, this is a new Inner Fire. Inner Fire was never the greatest arena card because it just, often wouldn't do enough. But this thing actually does, buff the health as well. So it actually does something. Even like, just imagine if you play this on a 3 mana 3/4, it turns into a 6/6. That's pretty good, right? It's actually pretty nuts. Then you can then kill off like whatever your opponent played, and then you still have 2 mana hero power. So that's essentially, I think, with the stat lines of mains and arena, it's mostly going to be what it is. It's going to be like a 2/3 or a 3/2 buff in the, in the early turns, which is just good. But also, you have the crazy potential that you might just, turn a 1/10 into a 12/12 or something nuts like that, right? And the other thing is, like, you can even, if your opponent has like a 9/1 or something that you just can't deal with, you can use this on it too and turn it into a 3/3. So overall, I mean, it just feels like this card is always going to be useful. You can even just preemptively play on your own minions as well. So I think it's too flexible to not be really good. So I'm going to give this again. I think since Priest really likes it and has some things you can do with this, I'm going to give this a 5. It's a weak 5 again, but I'm actually going to give this a 5. It just seems like it's always going to be something you're going to be pretty happy to have, and it's always going to be useful. All right, and that is it for Priest. Let's we'll go to the neutrals at the end. Let's move on to Paladins. So Paladin, last one I talked about Sidon. So here we have the 8 mana Dragon Brasswing. So this is 8 mana 9/7. At the end of your turn, deal 2 damage to all enemies. Honorable kill, restore 4 health to your hero. So it's all enemies, it even hits face. This, I mean, I don't know. This is like a super nutty version of Barongeddon. It's at end of your turn effect, so it repeats. If this thing doesn't die, it does it again. The thing is like, assuming you actually get to honorable kill anything, it's doing a lot to keep you alive too. It does everything you could ever want for a late game card, basically. It's just very good. We give this an easy 5 out of 5. I feel like this one won't be too controversial, so let's move on to another card, which is Vitality Surge. 2 mana holy spell, draw a minion, restore health to your hero equal to its cost. So obviously, this is a big Paladin card for constructed. In arena, you're just typically not going to draw something that big. You might draw something big, but I mean, even if you do, this thing is just 2 mana draw card. It's definitely not terrible. It's like a 2 mana cycle isn't that bad, but yeah, as long as you get, some healing, I guess that's some kind of compensation, right? It's just not really worth paying 2 mana to draw a minion. So I guess like in a slow deck, like maybe this isn't that bad. I'll give this a 2 out of 5, but honestly, yeah, I'll stick. It's like a weak. I think I'll give it a weak 2 out of 5. Just like, it's not actively bad, right? We will go with that. Next up, we have a 3 mana minion, Stonehearth Vindicator, 3 mana 3/1, Battle Cry. Draw a spell that costs 3 or less. It costs 0 this turn. So the thing with this card is like, it's going to depend obviously on, what you actually have in your deck. You're not guaranteed to even have spells that cost 3 less? You probably will though. Like, I mean, and the thing is that even you can imagine, like, if you could get something like, for example, I mean, Righteous Defense, the one thing is maybe you would just play it because it would be free, but it's not exactly, you know, turn 3 wouldn't be exactly the turn you'd want to play this most likely. If you get like a Secret or something, I don't think it's good enough exactly. So I feel like this isn't really a turn 3 play. Overall, you're going to want to just play it as, you know, draw and value later. And so again, like, since if you're just drawing a 3-mana card, it would be worth it probably if you do have, you know, stuff like Righteous Defense to try them pull them out of the deck. But overall, probably in most decks, this probably just isn't really going to be good enough. You're using it as value, but you're not really getting a high value thing because you're just pulling out a cheap card from your deck. So yeah, I'm going to give this one a weak 3 out of 5. This is okay. Obviously, I'm assuming that you actually have enough spells to activate it though. If you don't have the spells, obviously, it's just not going to be good enough though. Now let's move on to Protect the Innocent. This is a 5-mana spell. Summon a 5/5 defender with taunt. If your hero is healed this turn, summon another. So that's something that would make Vitality Surge a little bit more worth it. Overall, even with the cards you have, it's just in Arena, you're just not typically taking these kinds of cards that heal your hero. I guess maybe if you just happen to have, you know, a minion like a Traveling Healer, even a Voodoo Doctor or something, obviously this thing can have a lot of potential. But you're probably just not gonna hope for it too much. A lot of times this is just gonna be a 5-mana 5/5 taunt. The thing is though, is that a 5-mana 5/5 taunt really isn't that bad. So you wouldn't feel too bad just picking this, just hoping that maybe you get the upside, but if you don't, it's really not the end of the world. So I think this is a case where it's strong enough, just in the base case, that for the upside, I'm gonna give this a 4 out of 5. Because, you know, it's just, I think most of the time it's gonna be a 3 out of 5, but just, you know, if you actually pull it off, it's like a 6 out of 5. So hugely game winning if you can actually pull it off. And it's just not that hard to pull off. So I'm going to give it a 4 overall, just because you're just not paying that much for some pretty crazy upside. And next we move on to Hold the Bridge. It's a 3-mana holy spell in Paladin again. Give a minion +2/+1 in Divine Shield. It gains lifesteal until end of turn. This is basically a power crept version of pre-nerf Apotheosis. I find it really funny that, you know, they took this combo away from Priest and then they power creep it and then give it to Paladin. Very interesting. But yeah, like probably in Arena, obviously just the fact that you can get a big hit of lifesteal if you ever stick a minion is very good. Still probably overall, this card probably is slightly weaker than Noble Mount, but Noble Mount is an extremely strong Paladin card. So in a slow deck, this just does a lot. Of course, you do lose the lifesteal, so that one hit might just not be enough to save you just by, you know, pulling this off on one big minion, but it's definitely going to help a slower deck to stabilize. And just as a tempo card, it's not as good again as Noble Mount, but it's just still really good. So I don't think it's just quite a 5 out of 5. I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5. It's probably a stronger 4 out of 5, but I don't think it's quite a 5. And we move on to the last card in Paladin, which is the Cavalry Horn. 5-mana 3/2 weapon, Death Rattle, summon the lowest cost minion in your hand. So obviously this is, again, one of those big Paladin cards. On first glance, it doesn't look very good, but honestly, like if you think about it, assuming your opponent doesn't have weapon removal, which they might, which is going to be the big concern, you should be able to get pretty good value out of this most of the time, right? Because you can play this on turn 5, and then you have your whole turn 6 to dump all the small crap out of your hand, and then pull, you know, potentially something rather large out of your hand. But I think you should, a lot of the time, be able to get, you know, maybe like a 5 or a 6 mana card out of your hand. So I think honestly this is better than people would think it would be. The biggest risk again is that, well, if you're planning on doing exactly the thing I described, if they happen to weapon remove it and then it pulls out a 1-drop, it's like, well, that wasn't worth it, right? So I guess the thing I would say is that this card is just going to be kind of hit or miss. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 overall, because I do think it's going to be pretty good a lot of the time. It's just still a little bit slow, but Paladin has tools to stay alive and some pretty crazy late game to come back, so I think they can get away with something like this. With that, let's move on to the next class, which is Rogue. Rogue, I believe the last card we talked about was Lobotomizer, so let's move on to Cold Tooth Yeti. This is a 3-mana 1/5 with combo gain +3 attack. So a 3-mana 1/5, definitely not super good, but the main value of this thing here is on coin, you just get a turn 2 Yeti, 4/5. It'd be one of those things where honestly, like if you're going first, this thing probably just isn't gonna be that good. It'd be nice if you have like a 0-mana spell, like a backstab or something, but probably going first just not gonna be that good. But going second, you know, basically half of the games, this card is borderline unfair. Because otherwise going first, like you probably have to play this in a normal deck, maybe on turn 5 with a 2-drop, you know, something like that. And then it's good, it's just not really worth it probably. But it's just one of those funny things, because I think if you're going second, I think this is like a 4 out of 5 at least. And if you're going first, this is probably like a 2 out of 5. So I'm just going to give this a 3 out of 5 overall, because it'll probably be, you know, pretty good. Occasionally very good, but sometimes very awkward too. So we'll just even that out at 3 out of 5. Next we move on to Reconnaissance. This is a 2-mana spell in Rogue. Discover a Death Rattle minion from another class. It costs 2 less. So again, we don't know what cards can be in rotation, but just generally speaking, I mean, there's some pretty crazy death rattles, right? You can get like Rat King or something, cards that are actually like potentially game winning. And this is essentially a 0-mana discovery. You're getting class minions. A lot of the bad death rattles are neutral. So the fact that you can't get any, you're pretty much guaranteed to get something good, I would think, off of this. There are some synergy-based death rattles that could maybe won't be quite so good, but generally speaking, I think you're going to get something really good off of this. I think this is very, very strong. I'm willing to give this, I think, a 5 out of 5. It's just any kind of discovering class means. There's even like, you know, other class synergies and stuff. I think this is just very, very good. This is going to be auto pick, probably. Now let's move on to the next card, which is Wildpaw Null. 5 mana, 4/5 rush, costs 1 less for each card you've added to your hand from another class. So it says anytime if you just have to have added the card. So something like the Reconnaissance, for example, would work even if you haven't played the Death Rattle yet. Probably in Arena, you're just not going to expect to have added too many cards from other classes to your hand, right? But if you get one, this is already pretty good. Sometimes Rush is just really good in Arena, and honestly, a 5 mana 4/5 Rush just isn't that bad, even in the base case. So, but I feel the thing is, you probably just don't expect it to do too much more than that. So this is probably, I'm gonna give this like a 3 out of 5, but a strong 3 out of 5. With that, let's move on to Double Agent. Double Agent is a 3 mana 3/3 with Battle Cry. If you're holding a card from another class, summon a copy of this. Now that is, compared to the other thing, that is a lot of upside. So I mean, you could have just played like Reconnaissance on 2 and then get double Agent. And these are both common, so that is going to be a thing you're actually going to see people do a lot. That's actually kind of crazy. That's terrifying. This is probably just enough upside. The fact that you can even hit it on curve with a common combo like that is pretty nuts. It's hard to say. Again, it's still going to depend on exactly how much you can actually pull this off, and probably just can't pull it off that often. So I mean, this is going to be a really, if you can pull this off on curve, it's just super unfair, but I think that just won't happen very often. So for that, I'm going to give this, I'll give it a 3 out of 5 for upside, but it's just one of those things where sometimes it's going to be a 5 and sometimes it's going to be a 2, right? So I'll give it a 3 overall. Move on to the last card in Rogue, which is Contraband Stash. 5 mana spell, replay 5 cards from other classes you've played this game. So, very interesting card. The thing is like, you know, obviously, even if you do, it's probably just not good enough for Arena because you can't build around this. Obviously, if you build around this, it'd be very good, but even if you do get cards from other classes, right, you're not necessarily going to know what they are. Even if you do just have like one Reconnaissance that you've played or something, if you get like, again, like a Rat King, this would just be a 5 mana Rat King, right? Like, that's the one redeeming factor for this, is that just getting one card might be good enough. But that's the thing, is that you're just not guaranteed to get anything. It's definitely a card that if you do get some of these other Thief cards, you can definitely consider drafting this. But I think on the average deck, it's just not going to do anything. Or it might be too late by the time it actually does enough, right? And so honestly, maybe I should give it a 2 out of 5 just off of the upside there. So that's probably fair. I think I'll upgrade it to a 2 out of 5 just because it is pretty high upside. I mean, yeah, still not a consistent card that you're probably going to want to draft all that often. With that, let's move on to Shaman. Shaman has 6 new cards here that we haven't talked about. The first one is Windchill. This is a 1 mana spell. Freeze a minion, draw a card. So overall, like, any 1-mana spell that does something and replaces itself, it's going to be pretty good, right? You know, the fact that you get effectively a pretty high amount of tempo if your opponent just plays anything big ever and you just freeze it and don't let it trade into something, right? It can be used defensively to save health as well. And there are a lot of frost synergies in the Shaman now, so overall, might be a little high, but I'm going to give this like a weak 4 out of 5 because I think it's just going to be good, you know? It's just a nice thing to have. Doesn't cost you anything except 1 mana basically, so I think it's good. You know, there's all these other things, like you can just have it with this, and then it also deals 3 damage. It's great, right? Now let's talk about another great card, which is Wildpaw Cavern. This card happened to inspire me to make this tweet, which is that was relevant because it's so much better than the Druid one. But yeah, so this is 4 mana objective card. At the end of your turn, summon a 3/4 elemental that freezes, lasts 3 turns. So it's weird that Shaman got an objective that frankly is just so much better than all the other ones. Because I mean, a 4 mana 3/4 elemental with freeze, like that would be a bit of a weak 4-drop, but it's not even that. It's not like you're overpaying that much on the turn you play this. And then the next 2 turns, you just get 2 more. It's just, you're getting way too much out of this. It's just not even like remotely okay. So like, I mean, this is easy 5 out of 5. It just does way, way, way too much. It's just actually insane. So I think like this is easily like probably in the top 5 cards of the set for sure. Talking about another card which might be in the top 5 cards of the set, we have Snowfall Guardian. This is a 5 mana 3/3 with Battlecry, freeze all other minions. Gain +1/+1 for each frozen minion. So it does freeze your minions as well as your opponent's minions. But because it gains stats off of everything it freezes, that might not exactly be a bad thing. I feel like that's not even, it's actually not even gonna be that much of a downside unless you walk into an area of effect swing because of this, because, you know, it's not like you would actually, instead of trading off minions, you would just freeze your own board of stuff that's able to attack, because then the next turn, the minions that you froze will still be able to trade into whatever you would have traded them into hypothetically, because, you know, those minions will have been frozen as well and wouldn't have been able to attack anyway, right? So this is a thing where if you're getting like, if you're on an empty board, it's insane because you do need to hit 2 minions for it to really be worth it, at least. But I mean, you can potentially play this as, again, if it's a contested board, you might get this as like a 5 mana 9/9 or something for, as I'm saying, a lot of the time really no downside at all. So, and it also casts Frost Nova, by the way. So yeah, I don't know, this is an absurdly powerful card for Arena. It's like easy 5 out of 5 also. With that, let's move on to the next card, which is Sleepbreaker. 2 mana 3/2 Battlecry, add a Wind Chill to your hand. Wind Chill was the card we just talked about earlier, which is a 1 mana freeze which draws a card. So I mean, this is nuts because it's just like effectively it's a 2 mana 3/2 draw card. We finally reached that level of power creep that, you know, 2 3/2s just literally draw you a card, and it's a good card. It's a card I rated like as a weak 4 out of 5. So I mean, this is just very, very good. I mean, geez, I'm tempted to give this a 5 too. This would be a weak 5. This is either a strong 4 or a weak 5. It's just very good. It does too much for a 2-drop. It's because it replaces itself effectively. It's never bad. So it's just very, very good. Now let's move on to the next card, which is Glaciate. This is a 6 mana spell. Discover an 8-cost minion, summon it, and freeze it. So this is a weird one because it's just going to be a little inconsistent, right? You need to get a card that does something, you know, something that either at least has taunt or maybe has an ongoing effect, or else this really just isn't probably good enough, because doing nothing effectively that late in the game is a bit of a problem. But I mean, there are things you can get, right? You can get like a more Forge Fiend, or you can get something like this with Rush as well, or you can get this new card, which, you know, is like the new Runaway Blackwing. There are things you can get, it's just you're not always going to get something off of this. So it's a rather risky card to actually play. It probably has enough upside that's just gonna be kind of good enough. As long as you're not under direct pressure, right, this is probably just gonna be pretty good. So I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 5. It's just being held down a bit by, I think, the fact that you have to take in pressure off to really be able to get away with this consistently. But assuming you've done that, it's just gonna give you at least a lot of stats, right? So now let's move on to the last card, which is Frostbite. This is a 2 mana Frost spell, deal 3 damage. Honorable kill, your opponent's next spell costs 2 more. So that's an effect that, you know, you just get, right? There is some 2 mana deal 3 is already pretty good. This goes face as well, by the way. And the fact that if you do get to trigger that honorable kill, just the fact that they, you know, they might not be able to play their Flame Strike or, you know, whatever other card they might have wanted to play on curve. The fact that they might have to wait 2 turns later for that is pretty nuts. You know, if they want to activate that Flame Strike, they might have to, you know, play some other overcasted spell just to, you know, get that effect to go away. So yeah, it just does a lot again. So I mean, I don't think we can quite give this a 5 out of 5 just because I don't think it's going to be like super game winning, but it's a very good card. It's like a strong 4 out of 5, I think. Well, now let's move on to another class. Well, Shaman got some pretty crazy cards there. I believe we talked about this. So then the first one we have here is Pathmaker. This is a 3 mana 3/4 battle cry. Cast to the other choice from the last choose one spell you've cast. So on curve, most of the time, this is just going to be like a 3 mana 3/4. I guess you could have played like Power of the Wild on 2. There is another choose one card, which is here, but probably not going to be. It's an epic. You're not going to see it too much. So overall, like, I don't know, especially on curve, you're not going to expect to really get anything out of this, but it's a 3 mana 3/4. You probably have enough choose one spells that if you do play it later, you do get some kind of value. It's not guaranteed that cast is necessarily going to do that much for you, but it's pretty good. It's probably enough upside that I think I'll raise it to a 4 out of 5 just because, you know, it's probably going to do enough. A lot of the times it's just going to be a 3 mana 3/4, but that is okay in Arena. Moving on to another card here, which is Clawfury Adept. This is a 2 mana 2/3 battle cry. Give other friendly characters +1 attack this turn. So basically, they took a Savage Roar, cut it in half, and put it onto a River Croc. Pretty damn crazy. So like, even if your opponent, I mean, imagine they played a 2/1 on turn 1, you can just play this and kill the 2/1. It's just very good. This is in Druid, and Druid likes to have, you know, these type of Savage Roar type effects, so it's probably just not quite good enough to really give it a 5. It's just there's other more broken things. So this is like, I'll give this a 4, but I think it's a very strong 4. It would either be a strong 4 or weak 5, but yeah, it's absurd for a 2-drop. It's just way more than you would expect them to. Now let's move on to Wing Commander Mulverick. This is a 4 mana 2/5 rush. Your minions have honorable kill, summon a 2/2 Wyvern with rush. So this is an aura. It just gives all of your other minions that. It also has rush, so it includes itself. You can just trigger it yourself, and you know, then you just get more 2/2 rushes. So it's a little interesting. You really need to, it doesn't do enough by itself. You need to get just at least 1 honorable kill off of this. But then if you do, it's really good, because potentially, you know, the rushes that it spawns will also have honorable kill on them. So I mean, you could just have like, you could clear basically, it would actually act as like a 2 damage AoE if you can just trade off one thing. Actually, this thing will do it itself, so like, this thing actually casts Consecration basically. It's actually kind of nuts. So I think for that reason, it's just the only thing holding it back is that you do need to be able to trigger that first honorable kill, but otherwise, I mean, this is effectively AoE in a class that doesn't have AoE and really wants it, so I think it's very good. It's a legendary, you won't see it too much. And you can obviously think about the dream scenario, but it's probably just not going to do that much most of the time, so I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5. It's definitely good, but probably isn't going to line up perfectly most of the time, but it'll do enough to be useful. Now let's move on to Pride Seeker. This is a 3 mana 2/4 with Battle Cry. Your next choose one card costs 2 less. If you do have a choose one card that you want to play very quickly or even on the same turn, then effectively it's a 1 mana 2/4. Very good. Downside being, of course, that you actually have to have a choose one card, which you're not 100% guaranteed to have. But I think, like, in general, like, you're gonna have one most likely, and you can just throw this on turn 3 and then you get some super discounted choose one. It's not this turn, it's just the next one you play, so you can bank it for later. And so the one thing is that choose one cards tend to be overcosted already, and it's just not guaranteed that you're gonna really get too much benefit out of that upside. So I think this will be a 3 out of 5 here. Occasionally very good, but honestly most of the time probably rather mediocre. Let's move on to the next one, which is Heart of the Wild. 3 mana spell, give a minion +2/+2, then give your beasts +1/+1. So if you put this on a beast, it's 3/3 buff for 3 mana on that one minion, and then it also buffs all your beasts. The thing with this is, I mean, especially in Galaka Glutton meta, you don't really want to draft that many beasts. You're probably going to have some beasts in Druid just because you might not have a choice anyway, even if you wanted to avoid them. There are some good beasts in this set as well. But overall, this is probably going to be a rather weak buff. You really need like probably 2 beasts on board for this to be worth it. And then you need to have initiative, and then it's probably just not going to do enough most of the time. And so although this could be good sometimes, I think you'd just rather honestly have something a little more consistent, like just like a Power of the Wild or something, right? So I'm going to give this a 2 out of 5. I think it's a strong 2 out of 5, but it's still just a 2 out of 5. Druid has better beasts, better buffs basically, more consistent ones. Now let's move on to the next class, which is Hunter. Hunter, I don't remember if I talked about Mountain Bear. I'm just gonna say it's 7 mana 5/6 taunt, death rattle, 2/2/4 cubs with taunt. So taunt, that summons more taunt if you're playing, well, honestly, even in an aggressive hunter, like this is just a lot of stats overall, and it's just annoying. You know, idea would be you just get on board, and then your opponent probably won't be able to get past this, and then you know you just keep hitting him in your face with the other stuff, or in a defensive deck, right? You just play this and it's a hell of a lot of taunt and it keeps you alive. So very weak to silence, obviously, but overall it's just a hell of a lot of stats. Just a lot for a 7 mana minion. So it's essentially just a way better version of Savannah Hyman, I think. However, and I think because there is some silence in the game now and it's extremely weak to silence, I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5, but it's like a strong 4 out of 5. It's just a very good late game card for Hunter, because honestly Hunter just hasn't had that, so it will very much like that, because Savannah Hyman being rare, you just don't see it that much. Moving on to the next one, we have Stormpike Battle Ram. This is a 4 mana 4/3 beast with Death Rattle. Your next beast costs 2 less. So, I mean, a 4/3 rush typically isn't going to stay around that long, so potentially there's a fair chance you could just play, you know, a 2 mana beast for free or something like that on the same turn that you play this. Overall, Hunter is one of those classes where you're typically forced to pick beasts, even in Galaka Glutton meta. And the fact that really, I mean, Hunter likes to have rush because sometimes they struggle with initiative, and it's just really, you know, you should expect to be able to get the discounts. This is basically just a 2 mana 4/3 rush. It's very good. I'm going to give this as well a 4 out of 5. Moving on to the last Hunter card we have here, which is Ice Trap. 2 mana Epic Secret. When your opponent casts a spell, return it to their hand instead. It costs 1 more. So this card can be very good. People tend to have some spells nowadays, so it should be relatively consistent. One problem with this is it has the coin problem, right? The spell secret that summons the Panther, you could just play into their coin, you'd be pretty happy. This thing, you know, you're not happy to just give them a 1 mana coin, right? It doesn't really, I mean, you block the coin, but it's not worth a card, typically. And this has some very high potential because, you know, if you know that your opponent might want to cast, you know, some critical AoE on some critical turn, you can play this. So this thing is very useful if your opponent is playing that particular way. However, they can potentially play around this as well. And there are plenty of swings which involve minions anyway, so that's not necessarily going to stop this. So overall, I feel like this is going to have, you know, it's kind of the counterspell problem. It's probably a bit better than counterspell just because it's cheaper. And there are secret synergies in this class. But overall, this is probably just one of those types of things you're not really going to want to draft, but you'd be extremely happy to discover it in certain situations. So again, it's really just being held back by the fact that it's sometimes just not going to do anything. So I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5, but it's like a strong 2 out of 5. Just probably not going to be consistent enough to really be worth picking. All right, with that, let's move on to, I believe, the last class here, which is Demon Hunter. We talked about all of these, and we skipped the hero. So the first one we have here is the Battle-Worn Vanguard. This is a 2 mana 2/2 after hero attacks, summon 2 1/1 Fell Wings. So what I'm thinking with this card is, like, I mean, you could just play this on 2 and hope it lives, but really this is just a 3-drop, right? This is a 3 mana 2/2, which also summons 2 1/1s and deals 1 damage, because this is in Demon Hunter. That's just a lot of stats for 3 mana, right? And you get to deal 1 damage too. Fits very well into my style of Demon Hunter, where I hero power a lot, so I'm definitely going to be taking this card a lot. And then in general, like, this is not a one-time effect. You can do it multiple times, so your opponent has to remove it as well. And if they don't, they just get completely wrecked. So I'm struggling where to put this exactly. I think it's probably just not quite good enough to be like a 5. Honestly, I think it's close though. It's just, there's enough AoEs in the game, and even classes that don't have AoE are starting to get some AoE in this set, so it's probably just not gonna like snowball into a win just off of this too much. So I think it's not quite worth giving a 5. I'll give it a 4 out of 5, but a very strong 4 out of 5. And the last Demon Hunter card we have here is Flanking Maneuver. This is a 4-mana spell, summon a 4/2 demon with Rush. If it dies this turn, summon another. So there is some consideration that anything that, you know, summons multiple minions is good in Demon Hunter because there's some synergies for having minions die. But overall, I think the most natural way you would think to use this would be to kill 2 things on turn 4. Which is, you know, pretty good, right? It's a lot of damage, but I think the other thing that makes this really good is honestly just that, you know, you can just deal 8 damage to one thing as well. And one of the things that Demon Hunter particularly struggles with typically is just being able to deal with big things. So if your opponent plays an 8/8 or whatever, you can just kill it for 4 mana with this, basically using this as an assassinate, right? So I mean, overall, it's just a very flexible card, and it does a lot of things that honestly Demon Hunter just doesn't do super well. So I mean, I think this is just very, very good. And I feel like it's probably just not broken enough to give it a 5 out of 5 again. There's a lot of cards I'm saying this about, so I think we give this a 4 out of 5, but it's a solid 4 out of 5. And with that, that is it for the class cards. I think I'm going to end this video now, as my recording is at 92 minutes right now. Hopefully I can edit this to being less than an hour for all of you, but thanks a lot for hanging out, everyone. I'll do another video as well, which will probably upload relatively soon after this one, where I talk about all of the neutrals. So yeah. If you like the video, like. If you dislike it, subscribe if you want to see more of this stuff. Comment on your favorite card, your least favorite card, the cards that terrified you, cards you want to have banned from Arena, or whatever. But yeah, thanks a lot for hanging out. We will see you all in the next one.